History is often a chronicle of empires, but the story of England's rise to global power is the tale of a single extraordinary family. With cunning, cruelty, and an unyielding grip on power, they would transform a fractured nation into a formidable kingdom. They are the Tudors, the architects of a modern England, and a dynasty whose legacy is etched in conflict and achievement. In the wake of a tumultuous civil war, Henry Tudor seized the crown on a flimsy claim and faced a kingdom that was far from his own. Having lived most of his life in exile in France, he was a king without a court, more French in culture than English. His first act of political genius was to backdate the beginning of his reign to the day before the Battle of Bosworth. This simple maneuver retroactively declared all of Richard III's supporters as traitors, allowing Henry to confiscate their lands and titles, eliminating countless rivals in a single stroke. Despite this cunning start, Henry's hold on the throne was constantly threatened. He was forced to contend with two major impostors who challenged his legitimacy. The first was Lambert Simnel in 1487, who claimed to be a nephew of Richard III, and the second was Perkin Warbeck in 1491, who insisted he was one of the missing princes. While historians widely agree both were frauds, their existence underscored the fragility of Henry's new dynasty. The Warbeck conspiracy even involved Henry's own chamberlain, Sir William Stanley, a betrayal that led to a swift removal from power. By the late 1490s, however, the king had finally stabilized his reign. He secured his dynasty by producing two sons to serve as heirs, and he strengthened England's foreign policy through strategic marriages. He wed his elder son, Arthur, to Catherine of Aragon, forging a powerful anti-French alliance with Spain. The unexpected death of Arthur in 1502 was a devastating blow, but Henry, ever the pragmatist, salvaged the alliance by betrothing his new heir, the younger Henry, to the widowed princess. He also mended relations with Scotland by marrying his daughter, Margaret, to King James IV. Through it all, Henry was focused on one main objective: restoring England's national treasury. He was an obsessive accountant, poring over his books daily and meticulously tracking every penny owed to the crown. Henry was known for his personal thrift and his unwavering determination to collect every debt. While he was unpopular in his final years for his relentless fiscal policies, his uncompromising will to heal the country's finances left the kingdom wealthier and more financially secure than it had been in decades. When he passed away in 1509, he left a prosperous foundation for his successor. As Henry VII worked to secure his dynasty, major shifts were reshaping the lives of ordinary people. By the year 1500, England's population had fully recovered from the catastrophic losses of the Black Death. This population surge meant that wages and the availability of land were no longer growing as they had in the previous century, and in some areas, they began to shrink. One of the most contentious issues of the day was the practice of enclosure. This process involved landowners purchasing vast tracts of land and fencing them off, preventing commoners from using them. This denial of public land infuriated many regular Englishmen and severely limited their ability to farm. The decline of the feudal system meant that landowners no longer saw their property as a means to fulfill military obligations, but as an asset to be exploited for maximum profit. As a result, many landlords eagerly evicted farmers to use the land for grazing animals, especially sheep, to meet the soaring demand for wool. Despite several laws passed under Henry VIII to combat enclosures, they had little effect. Between 1485 and 1500, for instance, approximately 16,000 acres of land were enclosed across multiple shires, with most of it converted into pastures. The impact was not universal. While enclosures were a minor concern in some areas, others faced dire challenges, like Leicestershire, where some 40 villages were completely enclosed and had to be abandoned between 1485 and 1530. The shift to pasture land required much less labor, leading to widespread unemployment that drove a mass migration of rural people into the cities. Urban life, however, was also a challenge. 12-hour workdays were common, and the average laborer had little left of their wages after covering basic expenses like rent, food, and fuel. Nevertheless, when harvests were good and work was available, the urban English enjoyed a quality of life that surpassed that of any previous generation of commoners. This urbanization was a defining trend of the Tudor era. London alone saw its population explode from around 50,000 at the start of Henry VIII's reign to 200,000 by the time Elizabeth I died in 1603. While the nation was in flux, no one could have predicted the profound changes set in motion by King Henry VIII. History often paints him as a tyrannical glutton who destroyed the church to satisfy his personal desires. But this was far from the man he was at the start of his reign. Young, handsome, and athletic, Henry spent his early years enjoying the immense wealth his father had left him. With a love for sports, music, and hunting, his court was a vibrant center of Renaissance culture and royal pageantry that was the envy of Europe. A devout Catholic, Henry sought glory in wars against France and Spain, though he never achieved a notable military victory. By the late 1520s, two critical problems had emerged. First, Henry's lavish spending was quickly draining the royal treasury. Second, his wife, Catherine of Aragon, had failed to give him a male heir and was now past the age of childbearing. It was at this moment that the king's gaze fell upon Anne Boleyn, a woman who promised him a son if only he could marry her. In 1527, Henry's frustration boiled over when the Pope refused to annul his marriage to Catherine. But Anne Boleyn was more than just a potential wife. She was a Protestant. It's likely that it was Anne who influenced Henry's decision to embrace the Protestant movement that was sweeping across Europe. Henry began to appoint Protestants to positions of power, including Thomas Cranmer as Archbishop of Canterbury and Thomas Cromwell as his chief minister. The sincerity of Henry's conversion remains a subject of debate. Was his motive purely to marry Anne? Was it a simple grab for power? Regardless of his true intentions, in April 1533, Parliament passed a law declaring the king the ultimate authority on religious matters in England and Wales. Ignoring the subsequent excommunication from the Pope, Henry annulled his marriage to Catherine and married Anne, who was already pregnant with what she promised would be a son. To Henry's great dismay, she gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. For the people of England, Henry's break with Rome was largely a bureaucratic change that did not immediately alter their daily lives. Worship continued in what was essentially Catholicism without the Pope. Far more impactful was the subsequent dissolution of the monasteries. Seen as both symbols of papal power and rich sources of land and wealth for the cash-strapped crown, Henry ordered every monastery in England to be closed in 1536. A 1,000-year-old tradition of English monastic life was ended by royal decree. The monasteries had served as vital centers of charity and shelter for the common people. This, combined with spiraling food prices, triggered a massive uprising known as the Pilgrimage of Grace in 1536. Described as the greatest internal threat to the Tudor dynasty, the rebellion was a protest against both the religious and economic consequences of Henry's government. While the rebels did not directly target the king, they blamed his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, as a scapegoat. Despite widespread public sympathy for the rebels, Henry saw the uprising as an insult to his authority and had the leaders rounded up and put to death. To prevent further rebellions, Henry passed the Crown of Ireland Act in 1542, formalizing his title as King of Ireland, and tightened his control over Wales with the Laws in Wales Acts, which simplified English administration and suppressed the use of the Welsh language. These laws were resented by both nations, but successfully averted further revolts. One final significant religious change was the introduction of the English Bible. Although English translations had existed before, Henry ordered copies of William Tyndale's translation to be placed and read aloud in every church from 1539 onward. This opened up the faith to the common people, which was one of the more popular Protestant reforms, and helped secure acceptance of the new religious system. Anne Boleyn's time in the royal spotlight was brief. Henry, growing tired of her, had her accused of adultery and incest, leading to her removal from court in 1536. It's widely believed she had simply lost the king's interest. He swiftly married Jane Seymour less than 2 weeks later. It was Jane who finally gave him the male heir he so desperately wanted, Prince Edward, born in October 1537. The moment was bittersweet, as Jane died of complications from the birth just days later. She may have been the only wife Henry truly loved. He would go on to marry 3 more times: to Anne of Cleves, whom he divorced, to Catherine Howard, who was put to death for adultery, and finally to Catherine Parr, an intelligent and kind woman who remained married to Henry until his death in 1547. Knowing he would die before Edward came of age, Henry appointed a 16-man regency council led by Edward's maternal uncle, Edward Seymour, the Duke of Somerset. As Lord Protector, Somerset held immense power over the young king's early reign. Edward, raised as a devout Protestant, was surrounded by men of a similar mindset. Unlike his father's cautious approach, Edward's reign saw aggressive Protestant reforms that directly impacted the daily lives of his subjects. In line with new Protestant theology, all religious images and relics in English churches were destroyed, and the chantries, which offered prayers for the dead, were closed. The dissolution of the chantries also dismantled many charitable institutions, including schools, poor houses, and hospitals, which had provided vital support to the common people. The final straw was the forcible introduction of a new Protestant Book of Common Prayer in 1549. Edward's brief reign was marked by 2 serious rebellions. The first, in Cornwall in 1549, was against the new prayer book and was fiercely suppressed. A second revolt erupted in Norfolk in the same year, this time primarily fueled by the old issue of enclosures. Known as Kett's Rebellion, it demanded royal limits on enclosures and other reforms, targeting abuses in rents and tithes. This uprising was also put down with immense force. The widespread disorder reflected poorly on the Lord Protector, who was soon replaced by the Duke of Northumberland. Northumberland continued to advance the Reformation with a revised prayer book and mandatory church attendance at Protestant services. These dramatic changes were abruptly halted when King Edward VI fell ill and died in 1553. Edward's death was a disaster for the Protestants. The only remaining legitimate heir was his eldest half-sister, the staunch Catholic Mary. Northumberland and the dying king hastily passed a law to declare his Protestant cousin, Lady Jane Grey, as his successor, but it was a futile attempt. Lady Jane Grey had little support, and the nation rallied behind Mary as the rightful Tudor heir. On October 1st, 1553, Mary I was crowned the first sovereign queen of England. Her agenda was clear from the start: to restore Catholicism. She immediately reversed her half-brother's reforms, allowing Catholic Mass to be celebrated again, restoring icons and decorations to churches, and beginning the refounding of the monasteries her father had destroyed. To strengthen her foreign alliances and reconnect England with the Catholic world, she announced her intention to marry King Philip II of Spain. This marriage was hugely controversial, as many Englishmen, both noble and commoner, feared a foreign king who might seize control of England. In 1554, Wyatt's rebellion, a minor uprising, attempted to stop the marriage and the Catholic restoration, but it failed. The marriage proceeded, but not before Parliament passed strict laws to limit Philip's power. Like any monarch, Mary desired an heir, but she was already in her late 30s when she took the throne, and her husband showed little interest in staying in England. Mary's desperate need for an heir to prevent her Protestant half-sister, Elizabeth, from taking the throne was never fulfilled. Mary's deep-seated Catholicism dominated her reign and appeared to cloud her judgment. In 1555, as part of her campaign to dismantle the Protestant Reformation, Mary began a campaign of persecution against Protestant heretics. Around 300 Protestants were burned at the stake across England and Wales. Far from restoring Catholicism, the burnings horrified the populace and created martyrs for the Protestant cause. Most famously, Thomas Cranmer, the former Archbishop of Canterbury who had helped engineer Henry's divorce from Mary's mother, was burned at the stake in Oxford in 1556, becoming one of the most famous martyrs in English history. In the end, Mary's Catholic counter-reformation ended with her death in 1558. What she believed was a pregnancy turned out to be cancer. Unable to secure an heir, the crown passed to her half-sister, Elizabeth I. Young, educated, and moderate, Elizabeth I was faced with the monumental task of bringing stability to England's chaotic religious affairs. Her approach was a middle ground between hardline Protestantism and the traditional trappings of Catholicism. In the first 2 years of her reign, she passed the Acts of Supremacy and Uniformity to establish herself as the head of the Church and to mandate the use of a revised Book of Common Prayer. Her government later passed the 39 Articles, which officially outlined the beliefs of the Church of England. While more moderate than Edward's Protestantism, it was still a distinctly Protestant system. Elizabeth was more concerned with stability than fanaticism. She famously said she did not want to make windows into men's souls. As long as people outwardly conformed to the new religion, they faced no punishment for their private beliefs. Despite this, many Catholics were still unhappy, and radical Puritan Protestants felt she didn't go far enough. She spent the rest of her reign managing these fringe groups, passing laws to restrict the activities of Catholic missionaries, and appointing church officials to root out radical Puritans. Her middle ground approach ultimately satisfied the majority of the population and became the foundation of the Anglican Church that exists today. Elizabeth famously refused to marry, likely fearing that a husband would try to seize her power. The Virgin Queen claimed she was married only to England. Despite her love affairs, she remained unwed, much to the frustration of Mary's widower, Philip II, who sought to re-secure the English-Spanish alliance through marriage. This lack of an heir was a constant security concern, which became more grave as Catholic Europe turned against her. In 1586, a Catholic plot to assassinate Elizabeth and replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots, was uncovered. Elizabeth had her removed, an act that gave Philip the justification he needed to invade England. In 1588, Philip assembled the Spanish Armada, a fleet carrying tens of thousands of troops. With the world's most powerful empire bearing down on her, Elizabeth's days seemed numbered. But 3 factors saved England from certain defeat. First, Elizabeth herself, whose steadfast leadership and powerful speeches restored hope in the face of overwhelming odds. Second, a tremendous storm ravaged the Armada, sinking and damaging many ships. Finally, the strategic genius of English captains like Sir Francis Drake and John Hawkins, who sent fire ships into the battered Armada, inflicted devastating damage. Had Spain successfully landed, they likely would have won, but against all odds, England prevailed. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was a turning point in English history. England had repelled the world's greatest naval power and was now on its own path to greatness. The riches of the Americas had made Spain powerful, and Elizabeth was determined to do the same. Her reign saw the intensification of exploration and colonization efforts, with commissioned explorers like Sir Walter Raleigh, who sailed to the Americas and named the territory of Virginia in her honor. Her reign also saw England's first attempt at a North American colony at Roanoke Island, although it famously vanished without a trace. More consequentially, she chartered the East India Company in 1600 to manage trade in Asia, a company that would one day become a powerful arm of British imperialism. With religious stability, foreign rivals at bay, and new lands to explore, it's no surprise that Elizabeth's reign is remembered as a golden age. It was a time of prosperity at all levels. Elizabeth ruled efficiently and modestly, avoiding her father's extravagant spending. As a result, she only called Parliament into session 13 times during her 44-year reign. Trade flourished, and Elizabeth passed laws to protect and expand key economic sectors, like the wool trade. This new wealth fueled a vibrant wave of artistic and architectural expression. New goods from distant lands, like tobacco and potatoes, became widely available. The thriving merchant class was one of the biggest beneficiaries of this era. And of course, no discussion of Elizabethan England is complete without mentioning William Shakespeare. Born in 1564, Shakespeare began his career as an actor before becoming a renowned poet and playwright. His extensive collection of plays and sonnets includes some of the most famous stories in the English language, such as Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, and Macbeth. His creative use of language and rich portrayals of historical figures had an influence far beyond the stage. His immense popularity demonstrates the vibrant cultural environment of the Elizabethan age, where great artists could enjoy fame and fortune, while the public could enjoy the era's finest cultural productions. Despite all her successes, Elizabeth's final years were marked by economic hardship due to lingering hostilities with Spain and an Irish rebellion in 1595. Inflation suppressed wages, and vagrancy became a serious problem. The 1598 Poor Law provided for the relief of the poorest Englishmen, relying heavily on private charity and the parish churches to tackle the issue. This law would remain in effect until the 19th century. Elizabeth died in 1603 after an incredible 44-year reign. With no heir, the crown passed to James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England, finally uniting the two historic rivals under a single crown. The Tudor age was over, but the story of religious change, global exploration, and England's rise to true power was only just beginning. We animate history to make the story of the past more interesting and understandable. Our videos are based on the deep research of respected historians, so what you see on the screen is not just a story, but a documented reality. If you enjoyed this journey through the Tudor era, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more amazing content. Stay tuned, because the next video is even more incredible.